So welcome. Does anyone have any announcements that they'd like to share with the rest of the group? I'm not seeing any. Okay, a couple things we need to note. AI East Bay is working on putting together a list of small firms in the chapter for a private roundtable with that AICC is looking to host within the chapter. Basically, an executive from AI National, the EVP, Lakeisha and Woods will be visiting. And on September 26th from 2 to 4 p.m., they'd like to have a roundtable so that she can kind of sound out what members need, want, expect, and have up their sleeves if they are small firm members. So she's trying to learn about small firms by visiting this chapter and maybe others. Also can make a note on how Small Firm Forum operates. There's 3 of us that kind of manage it in the background. There's not a lot of time and effort. Each of us takes an equal amount of months, and we just provide a little bit of logistics for people who are putting on programs in terms of making sure that certain announcements get taken care of on time and so forth. And as you know, the way the program works is that we have Small Firm Forum members who volunteer to host a meeting. So I happen to be hosting today's meeting, but each month a different person is doing it. And so the 3 of us that are in the background here are me, Linda, and Rachel. And we are kind of thinking that we would like to add a 4th person because it's easy to do 3 months or 4 months. And if somebody has to leave at some point, then you're down to 3. It's not a big disruption. There can be some continuity. So we're looking for someone to perhaps volunteer for that. If anyone is interested, send us a text or something like that. And if you're, by the way, interested in being in the September 26th meeting at the AI office and with the EVP, you need to send a note to Sydney, and she is here. You can just send a private chat message to her and let her know that you're interested.
I'll also drop my email in the chat if people want to send something after the meeting too.
Okay.
Thank you, Donald.
You're welcome. Upcoming meetings. The next month's meeting it's in planning work at the moment, but it's going to be a presentation on ways to streamline the permit process in regards to sustainability and accessibility. We'll have more information on that as we get it. And the November meeting is Kirsten Hellman is putting that one on, and we'll have more to say about that, but it's basically about a tool that some people have developed to track decarbonization in building and construction. So that may be interesting. And then in December, we're thinking to have our annual holiday lunch where we work through setting up the months for and the volunteers for the year ahead, as well as to have a little fun and a catered lunch. Okay. So for today's meeting, we're kind of wanting to see if we can get a little bit more of real-time interaction among everyone who is here. A lot of our programs tend to be kind of a presentation with an audience. And so we want to make the audience a little bit more of the part of our presentation. So we have a few recommended protocols. It's up to you. You're free people. You can do what you want. But here's what we wrote. Let others see you even if you're eating. Small Firm Forum is always a lunch meeting. Mute if there are disruptive noises in your environment, but otherwise leave your mic on so that you can scream out loud. And if you can't control that urge, do it. And if someone says something you want to challenge or ask a follow-up question on, go ahead and do it. And it's fine to raise your hand if you want to speak. There's a couple ways to do that. You can just raise your hand on the screen, or you may know that in the Zoom software, there's a bunch of controls on your screen, probably on the bottom. And if you go into the control that's labeled reactions, there's a raise hand there. If you select that, it'll show up on the screen. It'll put you to the front of the list of people who are here. And people can see that your hand is raised. Okay, and later on, we're going to have presentations by a couple of interesting young architects, Daniel Zweig and Marcia Adair. And but until then, we thought to go through some questions just to see what you guys have learned and think and what you can add. So the first question that we put to you is, looking back to when you were just entering the profession, in what way has your experience in the profession not been what you expected? You don't want to take a shot at that? No? Claudia?
Well, I entered the profession a very long time ago. And I actually got my first architectural job in 1982. And those of you who were even alive then will maybe remember that there was a really terrible recession going in 82, 83. And I just lucked out and got a job with Roller and Masson. Charlie Masson was a great manager. He ran his office it was just so well organized, and we worked, the office was located on Van Ness Avenue in San Francisco, and we worked 4 10-hour days, which was a concept that had been floated then to reduce the amount of commute time people were spending. And it's too bad it fell by the wayside, because it was actually a really great thing, and we never worked a day of overtime or even an hour of overtime. He just was very systematic on how he ran his office. And so I think my first job was sort of a false leader in that I thought architectural offices were well organized and systematic and well managed. So then I went on to other firms and discovered a lot of dysfunction and craziness in the architectural profession.
That's interesting. Yeah, I worked in a firm where we did the 410 thing for a while. That was the Radcliffe Architects. I really like that idea. You know, you get a 3-day weekend and working the extra 2 hours, no big deal, particularly since everybody was doing things they were interested in anyway. Anyone else want to take a crack at that question? Looking back on where you were when you entered the profession, what way has your experience not been what you expected? No volunteers? Okay, I wrote down an answer to that, so I'll share mine. So in what ways was not as I expected? How much more there was to being an architect than just having a good feel and sense of design. In my experience, the design opportunities do not really arrive until some technical mastery is demonstrated. I did not expect the depth of learning experience related to the whole process of getting buildings designed and built. Even though I took my first drafting class in the 7th grade, drafting in college was one of my least interesting courses. I did not expect it to be so rich and fascinating in the professional world. Carol, how was it different for you than what you thought it was going to be?
Well, I go way back before Claudia, before anybody maybe was born, working when I was at grad school at MIT. And I think everything just unfolded. You know, there weren't very many women architects. I was just given opportunity to do whatever I could take on. And sort of being a workaholic type, which goes with being an architect and living and breathing architecture, there are no set hours, you're kind of doing it all the time. I think I just took on as much as I was exposed to, and I was exposed to a ton, and I ended up having job opportunities at big companies, and including 7.5 years at Bechtel. So I wouldn't do anything differently, only because, you know, it was a great period of time to be pushed as a minority female architect, and I guess people just liked my energy and what I did, and so things unfolded. I wouldn't do anything differently just because of, as I look back on the past, I think if you're just enthusiastic and energetic and do everything that comes your way, so it's not a small firm answer, really. I didn't really join this small firm until I had retired from ELS for a decade, long time. And now I just help friends. And so I love the contact with you guys. Just hearing how you do things, and it just keeps me in touch with what you're doing around here locally.
I think a lot of us have, our feet in different parts of the architecture world in a sense. So for example, okay, I do small projects sort of, but when I was in school, we studied the history of architecture and the great architects, and in our design classes, which was the center of really most everything that some of us love, we did things like we designed libraries. I mean, the kinds of things that you would have done at ELS. And then when we get out in the world, maybe we do like me and we do drugstores and supermarkets for a while. But so I don't know, I feel an affinity for architects of every stripe. Anyone else want to take on anything on this question or make a follow-up comment? Okay, I'll move on to question number 2. Knowing what you know now, what might you have done differently to your benefit in the beginning? And I'm going to give mine first because it kind of picks up on something a little bit that Carol got to in a way. So my response to this question is, in the beginning, I was a person with strengths and weaknesses which derived from the circumstances of my childhood and raising. I think there was more to work with in a fundamental way in those early stages in terms of changes that would add strength to who I was and what I was able to do than there was to work with as an adult. Changing some of those things might not have led me to architecture, which the man I am, I love. And so if I look at the beginning as the beginning of my career in architecture as an apprentice learning the trade, what would I do differently? Any deviation is going to have unknown effects. I might have benefited from focusing more on the kind of work I ended up doing. That might include seeking out architects who are focused on the same thing. I might have brought hands-on construction into the picture sooner, but there's just no way to be certain the outcome would be better. Professional regrets are not a big part of my picture. No one else.
I don't want to give anything away from my talk later, but I was just listening to a podcast recently by the Olsen Kundig group, and one of them was saying that his biggest recommendation for architecture graduates straight out of school would be to work on small projects. Maybe not necessarily small firms, but a lot of small projects very fast, just because every project you learn something new. And if you work on a project, let's say that runs for 8 years, you might not learn as much as you would if you worked on 20 projects in those 8 years and saw 20 different ways of doing something instead of just one way of doing something over and over and over. I thought that was really good.
I think that makes a lot of sense to me too, because if you go into a really big firm, you're gonna get put in a cubbyhole. They're gonna find out what you do relatively better than anybody else. And if it's rendering, you'll be a renderer. If it's detailing, you'll do that. If it's site measurements, you'll do that. Whereas if you work on small projects, you're gonna be in a small firm because the big firms can't really do them. And so you're gonna have exposure to a much broader spectrum of the things that an architect does. Just my opinion. Anybody else?
Well, if we're talking about mistakes we've made, I've made more than I can even list, but I didn't start out in college to study architecture. It was just beyond, it was just something that was never even on my radar. Although a dear friend of our family was an architect, and I'd been in his office and I'd looked at drawings and things like that. So I was aware of what architects did, but it just never occurred to me to pursue it. And I was going to Sonoma State University, and I kept changing my major, and they had an international program that would send us to Europe for a year. I had like 2 semesters of French, And so I just applied to go to France. There was no academic reason for them to send me, but it happened to be a year they had a budget surplus and they just sent everyone who applied to the program. That was my senior year. And while I was there, the thing I loved most about being in France was looking at the architecture, the urban design, and I became inspired. So I actually then graduated with a degree in French and theater arts, and then worked for 3 years, and then went back to school to study architecture. So that my big mistake was not discovering architecture the first time I went to college. But it did present itself to me ultimately. So
Wow, that's amazing. I also I was also in the state college system, and I also did a year in Europe,
Where?
in Italy, and it was an architecture school. So they actually had a studio of about 12 or 15 people who came from the 2 architecture state colleges in California, along with another 30 or 40 people in other majors like language and art history and that sort of thing. And I too was very impressed with the spirit of the architecture, both old and new. I'd never been inside a cathedral before, and that just took my breath away. I remember I did a lot of hitchhiking around. I remember one time I hitchhiked up into France and I went to Ronchamp, and that was also a very moving experience. Anyone else? Okay, we're moving through these. We may have a little bit more time for Marcia and Dan than we had planned, but that's fine. I'm enjoying the thoughts that you guys are sharing. Okay, question number 3. Have there been any joys or special rewards that surprised you? Okay, I'll go first and give you guys some chance to think about that one, because I'm sure the answer in all of your heads is my yes. Okay, so my answer, have there been any joys or special rewards that surprise you? My answer is many. One standout is the reward of being on my own, running my own business and setting my own priorities. Another is the way a computer, which came along after I'd done considerable time with a pencil, allowed me to do what would have taken 2 or 3 people doing things the old way, and doing it vastly better. Another special reward would be the special friendships I've made that were so dear. I can remember particular things. Excuse me, I could drink water. My dear friend Harry Jacobs is an example. He was very well known in the AIA. Harry and I had lunch together once a month, more than 20 years. Always at the same restaurant and always the same food. And when I saw the house he built for his family in the 90s, I learned something about architecture, and not by him saying something, but by me looking at what he did as an architect. And I saw that he always took care to consider the design of ceilings, because they can give a space such a rich energy and warmth. Another reward that I didn't expect would be the many I have worked with professionally who took a moment or two to show me things. I remember in my first job, Claudia, that was in 1976. I remember in my first job, I had only worked there for a month or so. And I remember the engineer that they hired, Russ Fuller, after I had been at the firm for a month, as I say, took me aside for a few minutes and showed me how his drawings were organized and how they described how the parts of buildings are expressed. He says, I'll always remember that and many more. So anyone else want to take a shot at this? And if you do, please keep yourself together. Special rewards that you didn't expect.
I think for me, the relationships that I've built with people that I wouldn't normally have encountered, and meaning mostly residential clients that I've been able to talk to and get to know and really start to understand, life in a house, for example, or life, in the space that we're redesigning or designing for them. So just being able to, and this sounds really, very, cliche and cheesy a little bit, but just, developing these relationships with people that I would normally never have any connection with. And then, and contractors too, just people along the way, just being able to build off of those experiences and build off of, being able to work through projects with them is just a joy and challenge, but also a lot of value there for me to grow as an architect. So, and going back to what a lot of what Dan said, as well as you, Donald, just being able to experience a lot of small projects over the past 10, 12 years, and being able to start and stop and finish a project has really helped me grow and becoming an architect that I never thought I would be. So it's a joy for me and a reward. Comes with a lot of work too, but it is something that I've enjoyed as a part of the process.
Andy, glad you could make it. Do you want to take this question? Share your thoughts on the question of whether or not there were any joys or special rewards that you didn't think or anticipate in the beginning.
Well, hey everyone. I think I just echo what Tim just said. When I started in the profession, I wasn't expecting to become a sole practitioner and work mainly with families, but that has been a real joy. I mean, working with families, especially families with children, and imagining that the spaces you're creating are going to be places where families grow and create memories. And I actually was at the tennis courts there at Grove near Ashby in Berkeley a few months ago. And at one of my very first client on my own, when I was moonlighting from ELS, Carol. So I was moonlighting, and he, all of a sudden I heard this man say, "Hey, Andrew," and it was this gentleman who I did my first project with. It was kind of a big backyard deck. And a young man was standing with him, and I realized it was one of his sons. And when I worked for them, all his sons were I think they were 6, 7, and 8. And this young man standing next to him. And I'm like, oh my God, John, this is one of your sons. And, he's 25 now. So I think that's one of the joys, is just, working with families, getting to know families. I mean, it's not always easy, the chemistry isn't always there. Sometimes it's just, having a good cordial professional relationship and the project's done and you say goodbye. But sometimes, it does become more of a relationship, and you see people, just out and about, or they call you for a second project. And that's really nice.
Anyone else want to add on to this and share your thoughts? I think over the years, I've done at least 3 projects where in the course of doing the project, typically couples. So the wife gets pregnant and has a birth, while I was there. I also did one project where one half of the client team died. 2 projects where one half of the client team died. So there's a real touch of life in the stuff that we do. I would like to ask a weird question related to that. Okay, when we talk about, you touched on it a little bit, Andrew, about the nature of the relationships, particularly in the small projects. So they're very personal projects. So, personal compatibility is kind of key, just like they are between friends. You're not friends with everybody, but there's some people that you really click with. And it's a similar kind of a thing when an architect works, on a residential project or a small project. You're kind of close to the client. You learn things about that client that their neighbors don't know. And but one thing I learned the hard way was, for me at least, it wasn't a good idea to work with established friends as clients. And it's something that you kind of touched on there, Andy, in a way that I have to behave in kind of a professional way. And, if you're a small firm, that's especially important, because you have to be careful, so that you do not do something that harms somebody or yourself. So you have to be very professional and careful about what you do. But what I find was that friendships bring along expectations of your behavior that fall outside what you would normally consider your behavioral envelope as a professional. And so I've just learned not to do that. Anyone else work with friends or have an experience about that? It could be different. It could be just me.
I'm actually struggling with that right now, and it's great to hear it from someone that has been doing it for longer, because all the information around me points to friends don't make good clients. But what I think that Andrew said is that sometimes client turn into friends, but if they start with that knowledge of the professional you, it's easier to transition.
Yeah, I agree. Anyone else want to say anything about unexpected rewards? Claudia?
Well, this is pretty similar to what Andrew's experience was. I was just parked at the ATM a week or so ago, and this woman I sort of half recognized came up to me and said, actually, I've run into her twice in this summer, but she said, Claudia, is that you? And I realized it was a client that I worked with like 20 years ago. And she just said, I just want you to know, we just love our family room. We are so happy there. And, I hate to say that my self-definition is the praise of other people, but it really felt good.
Yeah. That's very gratifying when you get happy clients at the end. Yeah. Very gratifying.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's more gratifying than it would be, say, if you were a real estate agent and just sold a house. I mean, it's more, in a way, it's a validation of who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. If there's nobody else on this question, anybody else want to add anything to what we said here? Okay, number 4, what has been more difficult than you imagined? And I guess I'll stick with going first, since that seems to give everybody a little bit of chance to collect. Okay, what has been more difficult than you imagined? This will be short. The endless evolution in code complexity. It's not something I cannot manage, but it fills up a considerable portion of the time I spend on projects. It can make clients' eyes glaze over. It becomes a key part of our marketability. It tends to shade our role as visual form givers.
Do you think it's getting worse?
Oh, I do. I just filed a zoning project in Fremont. We started working on this project a 1.5 years ago. We're on our 3rd zoning submittal. It's not because I do bad drawings or something like that, but it's developing an undeveloped piece of land where there are a lot of various zoning and environmental restrictions. Yeah, I think so. When I was in college, the building code was about the size of the Bible that you found in the side stand of the motel room drawer.
Wow.
And now what is it? The building code is like 2,000 pages, and we got
Imprint it.
and it seems like everybody thinks that, not everybody, but it seems like there's a cadre of people who are very much into the codes that believe that the biggest contribution they can do is to wipe out a gray area of the code. So, and the first job that I worked in, one of the 2 architects, father and son, said, the world is built according to the exceptions. And that was, I don't know, 40 years ago, and 50, I don't know. Anyway, it's true. But what happens is that the exceptions become problems for code officials, for the building officials, for the zoning officials, and then, well, it could be this, could be that, what do we do now? And so then what the code writers do is they get rid of the gray areas. And the way you get rid of the gray areas is you put in more black and white areas. And so they grow and they grow and they grow. Yeah, I think it's, I mean, I don't know, I'm going on. Somebody else.
There are a couple of cities I've told myself never to work in again. I have a connection through a contractor in Milpitas, and he keeps sending me these ADU projects. And Milpitas they are so persnickety, and they demand things no other city wants, like plumbing diagrams and calculation of the electrical loads. And I've never had to do that for any other city. So I'm just going to start saying no to Milpitas.
I guess all the rest of you think that the codes are a little too simpler and need to be a little longer, huh?
They're really fun. I found them really fun, Donald.
Mhm.
That's sick. That's just sick.
But I think it is true that for some of us, the ability to manage the codes becomes something that if you can do that, it makes you a very desirable person to hire as an architect. And they're not hiring you because you have a sense of design per se. It's just that they realize that getting through the process of regulatory reviews is onerous. And I wish some people would say, let's start looking at the things that are in the codes that are not vital, that we could do without. I'll give an example. My wife and I were in Mexico in June, beginning of June, in Guadalajara. Our niece was having a wedding, and nephew was graduating from college. And so the niece and her partner, she married, had rented a townhouse in a town 30 miles from Guadalajara. And so there's a stairway going up in the townhouse. It's a U-shaped stairway, okay? You go up one direction, you turn slightly, and then you go back up the other direction. The stairway, I mean, it had, how our codes tell us, you got to have 6 inches on the inside of a stairway, if it's a winder or it's making a turn or anything like that. No, this stairway had things going around the corner where if you put your foot wrong, you drop down, 12 or 14 inches or something like that. But here's the funny thing. Even though in our world, that would be considered an unsafe, illegal, and threatening stair,
Liability.
Nobody fell. Everybody knew how to use the stair, even me. And so I think, it's too late for me, but some people have to start looking at our code and kind of backing away from the things where they are being a little
Overkill.
yeah.
Maybe for homes, Donald, but for public buildings, I don't think you would want to just get rid of rules like that. I mean,
I
would you?
agree. No,
Yeah.
I
I
was
think
just in Oslo and went on Snow Hedda's Opera House.
Mhm.
And there's no way we could build that here. I mean, there are slopes, there are no level places. You can go all the way from the tip top of the roof and kill yourself,
No railings anywhere.
Nothing, little drainage slots that you could trip and sprain your ankle. But I mean, it's such an activator to the old port. It is phenomenal. It's just swarming with people. And safe cities, it's a whole nother story. But anyway, no rails anywhere. And you could fall into glass or fall into the fjord or fall into stairs. It's just amazing.
And so do they have 2 ambulances on standby 24 hours?
Now, a little tiny sign that said no bicycles or scooters, it's just amazing. It's a completely different level of trust that you're responsible for your own safety.
Level of trust. That's a nice way to word it. Yeah.
I like that idea.
I think that's the positive half of the picture, and then the negative half is they probably don't have the same culture of lawsuits in other countries.
Exactly. Yeah.
That kind of develop, that situation, Carol, I mean, that's dollar signs in the eyes of, personal injury attorneys,
Right.
One of the projects that I'll show you guys later that we're working on is in Brisbane, California, and they've I mean, it's a fairly small city, and they contract out all their code reviews and all of their permitting, which kind of leads to what some of the things we're talking about. The process takes forever, and one of the reasons, in my opinion, is that these people are getting paid by the city to review our drawings, and they feel that in order to prove their value, they need to find something worth reviewing.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think we had 4 permit plan checks, and every time we'd go back, they'd find something new to comment on. So it wasn't, we'd address their comments. They had no problems with the things we addressed, but then they'd find something new to zero in on. And I don't know, it just seems like because they're trying to prove their value to the city as you know, their reviewers. I don't know. It kind of leads to some of the issues that you're talking about, but a little different, I guess.
Anyone else? Okay, we're going to go into our last question, and then when we get through this, we'll go to the presentations. Looks like there'll be plenty of time for the presentation. We can maybe extend your time if you guys want to, or if you want to take questions or something. The last question, and I'll again give my answer just to give everybody a chance to chill. So we've gone from a kind of a acknowledgement that the technical code issues that we face are a big part of our work, which might be different than what we thought we were going to be involved in when we started loving architecture and buildings and things like that. Okay, so the last question is, in what way is architecture an art? And so here's my answer. I don't just look at a painting and think of it as art. And I've had difficulty validating the artist label. You can say you or someone is an artist, but that can mean very little or a lot. I tend to think of art as wise behavior, and an artist as someone who shows wisdom in what they do. That does not exclude the traditional realms of art like music, dance, or painting, but it does include other beautiful things that do not fit the traditional realms. I think architecture is an art when it shows wise behavior. The wisdom may not be obvious or immediately understood. And I think as an afterthought, this does kind of allow for the traditional controversy about the quality of a work of art, because now you're just having to deal with the aspect as to whether or not it shows wisdom in what they do. And I think as architects, I think that, well, never mind. That's my thought on. So I think architecture can be an art. It depends how it's done. But I don't think about it in the way that we were taught to think about it as an art. Andrew, you do beautiful drawings. To my mind, they have wisdom, and I think of you as a bit of an artist. What do you think?
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Donald. I think we are artists. We have a lot of kind of rules that, kind of quote unquote more fine arts don't have, all the codes that you've been talking about, and, all the constrictions of budget and program and all those things. But within those boundaries, we're only limited by our creativity and what we do, given the limitations that were handed at the beginning of the project. I think it's up to each of us to kind of look for those opportunities, to do something that kind of transcends just the function, and this is legal, and this is something that my client can afford. Is there a way that you can elevate it? And it's not always possible, but I know I always try to look for something, which I'm not always successful. Like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, that kind of thing. But I think we're all artists to some degree in some fashion. And I do think that architecture is an art. And I know that I'm as guilty as probably the reputation of architects is that we're not good business people because we all think we're artists. And I think I'm definitely guilty of that. Like I'm not really motivated too much. I like making a decent living, but I'm not trying to get rich here. And I'm trying to create something that is not only functions well, but is also beautiful.
Yeah, in addition to design and beauty as part of the art of architecture, there's the art of compromise and negotiation and balance and conducting this vast symphony of players in the game and staying in touch and friends, or however you want to call it, good relationships with clients and cities and all your consultants and everything. So I've run into a lot of people in my travels this summer that are in my age group, definitely aging. And a lot of people look back and they go, wow, you're a retired architect. It's like, if I had it all to do over again, I should have been an architect, I love this. And there are a lot of people, that are beautiful, the photographers, and they've done well in IBM or whatever their work was. But I think the word art should be applied to architecture because it is so complex. It's not just 5 things, it's just vast what you have to juggle. If it comes out well. I mean, looking at Snowhead as the before picture of the port, which is just like any port, 5-lane roads and horrible waterfront. And now it's just connects the train station and hotels and the tram and the ferry, and it's filled with local people, and they're building housing up the wazoo all over the place, museum. I mean, it's phenomenal. And I do think it was a catalyst for changing how people look at that edge of the city. So it's an art.
I thought that was interesting, Carol, what you said about bumping into people, photographers and people like that, and saying, I wish I had been an architect. I don't know, I've had that too, maybe others have. I've seen that too. I've had that experience, okay? But what I kind of find interesting, a little bit interesting about that is that probably, I'm speculating, those people, when they thought about architecture, they were thinking about architecture the way we saw it when we first saw it. They're just, it's the impression of the building, which, can sometimes be very, very compelling and beautiful and take your breath away and all that kind of stuff. And that's what they think, that's what they see in us. That's what they imagine we've been doing, I think.
What I get a lot actually is not only, I wish I wanted to be an architect. The second part I hear much more often than I would have expected is, but I wasn't good at math. And I have to see them, you don't really have to be that good at math. It's amazing to me how often I hear that. And I have to break it to you, but you don't really need to do that much math.
But you need logic, and you need a lot of skills that may be related to math and music.
Sure, that's true. That's true.
That's just an easy way for them to phrase those other skills.
True. Yeah.
And
Donald, I've been wanting to. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, you can probably make the same argument. A lot of architects, you don't need to be an artist in any way, right? You don't need to have any fine art skills whatsoever to be an architect of some magnitude.
That's true. Yeah.
Yes, I've known people that all they did was write specs, and a licensed architect, and all she ever did in this company was write specs. I mean, I think I'd go crazy.
Yeah, me too.
Yes.
Long ago, when I worked at the Ratcliffe Architects, they had a dedicated spec writer. And what he majored in at Cal was sculpture. And that was the other side to his life. He was a sculptor. He sculpted things, but he had a mind for specs that was kind of obscene.
Actually, now that you mention it,
Jack Margolis.
One person I knew who only wrote specs was a phenomenal painter. He definitely had the creative side to his personality. So that does happen.
Donald, I've been meaning to see if everyone doesn't mind if I answer one of the questions at the beginning that I missed because I came in late.
Yeah, for sure.
I skimmed your email when you announced today's Zoom, and including the questions. And the first question about in what way is your experience in the profession not been what you expected? I thought about that for a while, and I realized something that it's going to sound like water to a fish, but I never realized that I was going to be working with a computer.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
I got into it because I like to draw, and I don't know what kids in the programs are learning now and how much hand drafting they do, but I did very little computer drafting in architecture school. I went to school, I got out in 99, and I had one AutoCAD class in school, and then I've never drafted in a professional environment since day one. I've always worked, with a computer, and I have a very strong Luddite streak in me. And there's a part of me that still wishes, in fact, I've toyed with the idea of just trying to do a project completely by hand, because I feel like the feeling of craft that you have by having a pencil in your hand is so much stronger than manipulating lines on a computer screen.
Mhm.
And I'm very ambivalent about that. I know it enables lots of things that we couldn't do before the advent of CAD and 3D modeling and all that stuff, but I don't know. I feel like the bulk of buildings that are built today are no better, and in fact, much worse than buildings that were designed and built 100 years ago. So
I think people who, I think, Andy, what you should first of all do is get a job as a drafter somewhere and do it in pencil. Because, my first 13 years were in pencil.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of does something to your brain. And I think that when you then switch to the computer and stop doing it in pencil, you bring with you a lot of the ideas on how you describe a project with a pencil, into the computer. I'll tell you a funny computer story. When I was in school, we had a Fortran class. The pocket computer had just come out. And I remember, well, anyway, it had just, the Hewlett-Packard little thing, but in the Fortran class, we had one job where we were to construct a wireframe object, and then we were going to rotate it on the computer. And we're talking about a wireframe object with maybe, I don't know, a dozen lines on it connected, so it's a cube or it does something, and you had to program and punch them onto paper cards. And then what happened is you had to do this at night, because you had to go down to the campus computer system, which had a $3 million IBM mainframe. And you'd go into the room and you got 10 minutes, and they would shut down all the other computer processing for the school, its finances, the administration, everything, while you sat down on a terminal and you got to watch it rotate in perspective.
So are you advocating, are you in support of computer aided design, Donald, and where we are now, where we've gotten to? You're a booster of it. You're a supporter of it.
In my realm, which is the realm I know. Now, Daniel working at SOM, that's a totally different world with totally different needs. But yeah, I'm facile with the computer. I can make it do what I want. I can do things I didn't used to be able to do in pencil. My drawings are more accurate. In pencil, you had to organize your drawings, right? You got some details, so you put them on the page here, and there. Revising them, right where it is. Now, oh, I don't want that detail on that page. I want it on the next page, or I want another detail just like that. I don't have to redraw it. It's just copy and paste and tweak. So, but I don't know, we're all kind of got our own experience and our own way of doing things. I mean, I also do on some projects 3D modeling, and I like that, and I like the software. They're good tools. I like good tools. They can be good tools.
Many years ago, I don't know, I can't remember the details of where I was, but I was on some kind of tour or something. And someone had a set of drawings for a building in San Francisco. And it's like a mid-rise tower. I don't know how many stories, maybe 20, 25 stories or something, from, early 1900s. And the whole set of drawings was like 20 sheets of drawings for the entire building, including like the plaster relief design over the entry to the building. And, everything was there. like, you know, was all the language were there. It was this kind of beautiful presentation. All the information that was needed for the construction of this 25-story building was like in 20 sheets of drawings. I mean, that's kind of only partially related to my point about CAD drafting. It's also like the complexity of building and like all the different disciplines and like the building systems and liability and all this stuff. But I don't know, there's just, I'm kind of idealizing like the past and like, I don't know, people drawing on paper or linen or whatever it was.
It's amazing. You look at some of the old drawings like by Julie Morgan or Louis Sullivan or something like that. And I mean, she was an engineer, you know, so she understood how the thing stands up. But there are parts of the drawings which are decorative. And you're supposed to look at, the workers are supposed to look at that drawing, talk to the architect and make it look like that. And
Right.
it's a, by today's standard, it's an insufficient description.
Yeah.
You're talking about a time too when contractors were better and had better skills and didn't sub out everything, and also a time when architects were actually more a part of the construction process. So I think we have to use more of those sheets, more of those details to communicate further along.
Yep.
Because I feel like we just get cut out at the end a lot of times. You know, we're not on site all the time. You know, the Julia Morgans, these, you know, those architects would live on site with these projects, and they would be
Yeah.
there every day
Yeah.
and talking to the contractor, having meetings with them, showing them what to do. We just don't get that anymore, unfortunately. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, maybe we can switch over to our two presentations. Marcia is going to go first. And so at about 12:15 or 12:14 or something like that, we'll switch over to Daniel. They can do what they want for however long they want, take questions or just present. So Marcia, welcome again. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you want to share with us.
Hi, oh, thank you. Thank you first for the opportunity. I'm going to share my screen now. I made a little PowerPoint to talk. Oops. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Just fine, no problems. Okay. Yes, thank you for the opportunity to talking to you guys and to share experience. And I've learned a lot already just from hearing you guys. So if you have thoughts on my presentation and if I say something that you think I can use some help with, just please reach out and let me know. All right. I just got my license here in California, and I actually graduated in Brazil. So I have a Brazilian architect's license, also in architecture and urban planning, and I am certified in green building sustainable design by UC Davis. And I just recently opened my company in Fairfield. All right, so I'll talk a little bit about the phases of my professional career and explain some like what the challenges that I faced and the opportunities those brought. So I graduated from UFRN, which is a public university in Brazil. It's at the time it was the 5th best architecture university in the country, and it was really hard to get in. On the year I tried to get in, there were 400 people competing for only 40 seats on that year. And in Brazil, the education system is a little different because you need to decide what you are going to study, the course you're going to take before you get in. And so I had to make that decision when I was 18, and it was a hard decision because I didn't feel like I was mature enough to decide for the rest of my life what I was going to do. But it made me grow up faster, and studying, I had to study really hard. So imagine doing all the AREs in like 2 days. So that's what the test to get in felt like. But it allowed me to realize how much I could do and how far I could go to reach my goals. So that was cool. And at college, I was a little bit of an oddball. I really liked nature and how it to make architecture that would impact the environment less. And I found out that's called sustainability in college, and I completely fell in love with it. And even though I was an oddball, because most people are concerned about interior design and urban planning, I was able to solidify my interest and realize what I really liked doing and what I liked learning about. So after I graduated, I came to the US, and it was a bad time to look for work because we were still recovering from the crash of the housing market. And from 2008, I came in 2011. I had no professional experience in the US, and I had no academic knowledge of the construction systems. So I couldn't find any jobs and I was completely desperate. But that allowed me to have some free time, and I was so eager to work and I was so eager to learn that I would take anything that came my way. And I was able to volunteer for Habitat for Humanity. And I actually learned a lot at the construction site, and I learned a lot at their office where I volunteer. I think I volunteered there for a few months full time. And that's when I was able to get my first job at OAG Architects, which Tim and Chris that just left the chat work at now. And I felt very thankful that even though I was not an architect and I didn't have any experience, they took me in, and they were very experienced professionals, and they were very patient, and they taught me a lot, and everything they would throw my way, I would take it and I would try to learn from it. Oh, that was another shock, that when I left Brazil, I was an architect, and when I landed in the US, I was no longer an architect. So starting from the beginning, starting from scratch was a bit of a challenge, but the good thing is that I hadn't been in the industry for too long, so learning everything from scratch wasn't too much of a shock, so it was okay. And that's when I took a break from my professional career to grow my family, and that's when I had my first child, who is 6 years old now. And while I had, after she was born, I kept studying for the ARIES and passing the ARIES. The fact that I was the primary caregiver for this child didn't allow me to have full-time work. And so I just studied my butt off, and I was able to pass all the ARIES. And while I was studying for the ARIES, I met the boss for my new company, Tyler Kubik at Design Draw Build. And I learned so much at the 4 years I spent there. And we mentioned previously that try to get a lot of projects that are small, because you'll be exposed to a lot of phases and a lot of hats, and you're gonna have to wear a lot of hats. And I don't think I would be able to learn that much if I had gone to a big company. So I'm very thankful for the time I spent at Design Draw Build. And while I was there, I was able to finish all my AXPs. And then I got pregnant again with my second child, and he was born in December 2019. And right when I was about to get back to work, COVID hit. So I had time to study for the CSE. Also, it's funny, fun fact, while I was on maternity leave, I volunteered at Restore, Habitat Restore, and I went into labor at Habitat Restore. So it was, I just think it's a fun fact. I've taken him there multiple times and talked to the manager. I'm like, he was almost born here. When I was studying for the CSC, I actually failed once, and at the time I had 2 kids and I was working part-time for Design Draw Build, and I got completely dismotivated. And I just felt like I shouldn't even get a license. I'm like, what the heck am I doing? Why am I killing myself over this? I was pulling pretty long hours and I was exhausted. And but I was able to revisit and realign my objectives and keep studying to try to pass. I passed the second time, thankfully, and it was complete rejoice. It felt a little surreal, but it was super cool. Also, that same year, which was this year, I was planning to go to the A22, but I didn't know anybody, and I had just left Design Draw Build, so I didn't even have. They were going, but I knew I wasn't gonna be like their team, and I thought of not going, but I ended up going, and I went as a licensed architect, which had a special taste. I was particularly proud of myself for that. And while at A22, I met some amazing people, made some really cool professional friendships. And one of them was the lady that is sitting to my right. She is the president of the Brazilian Architectural Board. And I never thought I would find the president of the Brazilian Architects Board in Chicago, but I did. And we became friends. We exchanged personal phone numbers, and it was such a cool experience. And I think if I was there with a team, I wouldn't have met her in the way that I did. So that was cool. So I left Design Draw Build, and I decided to start my own company. I say that ambition was a challenge because I realized that I couldn't work for other people 100% of the time anymore. I had to do something on my own. The problem with starting my own company is that I still don't have any clients. So and I'm a foreign professional, which means that some of the cultural processes that people that grew up here went through, I didn't go through. So I'm having to relearn some of the cultural things that you guys actually grew up and is embedded in your personality. The good thing is that the market is pretty good right now to open still good right now to open a company. And I had enough time, I'm having enough time to properly develop it. And through my struggles, I've been able to help other people that are like me, that are foreign professionals. I actually have a group on Facebook called Brazilian Architects in the USA. And I've actually helped several people from being completely lost and just arriving in the US looking for a job to study and studying for the AREs and getting a job. So I'm pretty proud of it. So the company that I just opened, Sustainable AF, Sustainable Architecture Firm. I'm located in Fairfield. And I'm going to talk a little bit about one of my projects that I'm pretty proud of. This is a Pampa Brazilian Steakhouse in Vacaville, 4,100 square feet, no major exterior changes, and it was a full interior retrofit. I had to do ADA code check, well, not ADA code check. I had to make sure the bathrooms were accessible. We only changed like 2 walls in the whole project. The rest was all finishes, but I enjoyed doing it, and I learned so much doing this project that I can't even begin. Here is the new dining area. Here's the bar that we put in where there was nothing. The kitchen was retrofitted, and things that were already there were repurposed. and some of them were repositioned. It was very challenging because the client had no budget, so I had to do things that architects don't usually do. And like yeah. So one of the things, they had no specs for anything. And the city, the health department asked for specs for everything. So I had to dig up this really old equipment specs, and that was very challenging, but very enlightening. Repurposing some of this existing spaces, and yeah, and that's it. And I want to thank you guys for the opportunity to talk, and please let me know what you thought.
Marcia, that's beautiful presentation. I have one question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so you went to architecture school in Brazil. One of your options would have been to be an architect in Brazil, but you decided to come to the US. What drove that?
My husband.
That was going to be my first guess. Cool. Anybody else have any questions? We should go to Daniel in about 1 minute if we can.
Nice work,
just
Marcia.
Yeah, I just want to say you're doing great, Marcia. Kudos to you for, you know, being in a strange country and working hard and being curious, and you're rocking it.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, great job, Marcia. Just curious, what are your goals going forward? I mean, what do you hope to see your firm become? Where do you see yourself maybe in a couple of years?
You're asking where I see myself in a couple of years?
Yeah, just a quick question. Just where do you see your firm going now that you started?
Oh, I intend to grow. I have the ambition to grow. I have the ambition to keep helping foreign architects that are trying to make a legal living in the US. Yeah, just keep growing and doing. I hope I can do more sustainable projects, which I don't have a lot of experience on. So I have academic knowledge, but I have never been able to do a project in that area. So I guess that's where I hope to be.
Okay, it's time to Dan, if he's still here. There you are. Go ahead, Dan.
Oh, I'm no longer a co-host if Sydney's still there. Or if you guys can make me a
Oh,
co-host.
here, let me make you a co-host. All right, try it now.
Thanks.
Mhm.
All right. You guys can see my screen.
Yes.
So a little background on me. We can see the East Bay there. I'm from small town Occidental, which is in West Sonoma County. Some of you may have been there before, kind of wine country there between Santa Rosa and Bodega Bay. And I grew up in a family with great family. My dad here in this photo on the left is a general contractor for a company of 2 to 3 people. So very small, mostly just carpenter, mostly does remodels. These photos are actually from a granny unit that I designed for my grandparents on my dad's property in Occidental. So he built it, I designed it, they live in it, kind of fun little internal project there. And my mom, which I think is in the next photo here, went to CCA here in the East Bay, back when it was called California College of the Arts and Crafts, so CCAC. But I don't think I realized it at the time, but there's probably a pretty big influence from the 2 of them for why I got into architecture, my love of building things, my love of art and construction. When I was in high school, I started working for a firm called Persinger Architects. They were out of Sebastopol or Grayton, California, mostly doing modular school buildings, but also a lot of re-roofs, a lot of solar projects, some larger school campuses. And then that project on the bottom right was the school where I went to, middle school. It was a project that Persinger didn't design, but they were the project architect for. And then I, while I was still in high school, pushed through the LEED Platinum certification for that. So that was kind of all my upbringing prior to applying to school and learning about architecture from the school side, which, as we kind of touched on earlier, is a lot different than architecture from the firm side. So I came at it from a totally different angle. I went to IIT in Chicago. Chicago is a pretty great place to study architecture. I loved seeing all the buildings there and working in Crown Hall, which is that photo on the top right, or this photo on the left. It was a pretty fun experience. Good way to kind of crash course into architecture, see it from a whole nother perspective after working for this small firm in Northern California. And then these are some old shots from my portfolio back from when I was graduating from college, just different projects I worked on, interested in urbanism, interested in craft, also interested in high rises and things like that, which brought me to one of my first internships, Architecture International, a firm in Mill Valley that's no longer around. John Sheehy, I don't know if anyone knew him, used to work for Walter Gropius and then started Architecture International out here on the West Coast. They have since merged with Smith Group, but I worked with them a few years before he retired on some large projects in Malaysia and fun high rises here and there. So that was a great experience before my final year of school. And then after school, I joined directly from school to SOM. The projects I worked on for SOM were large projects. No, I wouldn't call high-rise towers, although I guess technically they're high-rises, but they're not towers in my mind. Some more mid-rise projects in Beijing. The top right photo is a project I work on, Moynihan train station in New York City. The building in the middle right is Merced, a lab building. These are all big teams that I played a maybe small part on, but they were projects that were near and dear to me. And then in 2016, I got put on the Moscone expansion team for SOM, and the team from our side was 3 people, and the project was under construction, and I was able to be on site almost, I'd say, 3 times a week. I was kind of based out of our site office for 2.5 years, just me and a few architects from SOM, and got to see the project go from what it was before through demolition. Kind of like what Marcia has said, working on existing conditions can be extremely enlightening, and it was a big learning experience. So great to work on a large project like this and also get to see it develop into something that's worth being proud of. So I love walking by it still and seeing it, what it's become since. So I think I have a few more minutes here. The project I really wanted to get to, I guess I worked on this from 2016 through 2019, led a few tours on it. This is probably the exact opposite of small firm forum content typically, because this is not a small firm and definitely not a small project. It was over 500,000 square feet, multiple bridges, pretty large project, but it was fun to take AIA a few times on a few visits, and like I said, get to be on site visits every day or a couple times a week at least. From there, maybe I'm stuck in a loop now. From there, I wanted to talk about the project I'm working on now, which is that Brisbane project I mentioned earlier, and I'll just kind of zoom through it. It's based in Sierra Point, which, as many of you probably know, kind of north of SFO. It's an old landfill site, and our project was built on that landfill. It's a nice access spot right along 101, connects to the Bay Trail, connects to ferries, obviously connects to the freeway there. And many of you might have seen it. It was a large vacant site for many, many years, probably because it was a landfill site. But we proposed building this kind of large podium and these 3 office lab towers. It's a biotech life science campus core and shell project. So this was our design, kind of grand lobbies, a large courtyard space looking out towards the bay, high performing curtain wall, et cetera, et cetera. and it's been really rewarding. I've been on this project for 3 years now. And it was great to see it from from design into construction. So this is where it is today, or a couple of weeks ago. It's moving along very quickly. Like I said, it's a landfill site. It was fun to learn a little bit about that. Definitely not an expert on that, but we had to put in over 1,600 piles, 200-foot long piles into the ground to support the foundation of the building. So it's a pile sort of building, and then it's built. There was an existing clay cap on the landfill, and then we have an additional clay cap here to prevent methane from kind of going up into the building. So that's a fun part of it being built on a landfill. But it's been really rewarding seeing this through construction and being able to, I was kind of responsible for most of the construction documents development, and kind of so far it's been a fairly smooth construction process. So it's great to see curtain wall starting to come in. We just topped out 2 or 3 weeks ago. So we're done with structural steel at this point and starting to kind of finish out the interior spaces and exterior spaces as well. So just wanted to give a little contrast maybe to typical small firm forum, but give you guys an introduction of who I am. And Don, I wanted to thank you again. Tim and I reached out a few months ago and had a few small forum people speak at a Young Architects Forum, talking about starting your own firm. And this is kind of our way of kind of sharing back what some of the young architects for AA East Bay are working on. Now that we know what some of the things you guys are working on is.
It's very interesting. We're a very diverse profession.
Yeah.
And SOM, from when I was a kid, I knew about SOM, and so it's got quite a history. I have one question for you. You mentioned
course.
about the landfill and methane.
Mhm.
Is the methane emissions typical of all landfills, or a particular problem with this one? And is it kind of a teeny tiny thing that is less, not so serious, or is it a not so teeny tiny thing that is pretty serious?
I would say it's typical of all landfills, and maybe even non-landfill sites in the Bay Area. I think a lot of methane mitigation kind of needs to be done for a lot of sites that are built. And usually it's remedial action, but with a project where it was clearly going to have methane intrusion, we kind of took it on at a head. The project's fairly, the scope of that is fairly minimal. So like I said, there's the clay cap, and then there's also an under slab vent system that vents up to the roof of each building. So did that answer your second part of your question? What was that?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. All the steel down in the landfill also has cathodic protection on it. So it's charged so that it does not rust in the landfill, which I also found pretty interesting and don't know enough about.
Does the knowledge of dealing with problems like that, is that just a natural part of the skill set in a big firm like SOM?
No. These are specialized consultants for specific projects like this. So no, that was nothing that we had any expertise on, but we found the right people to bring on who had worked, especially people who had worked on other projects in Sierra Point and had a lot of lessons learned. They're expecting to see upwards of 6 feet of settlement for the parts of the site that are not pile supported. So a lot of the parking isn't pile supported. Doesn't have a foundation under it. And so a lot of the site's going to kind of morph over the next 20 to 30 years. They're expecting like 1 to 6 feet of settlement. So a lot of interesting parts of working on a landfill site for sure.
And how long was the process of getting approval for the use and the process of getting approval of the construction documents?
I would say it was probably 1 to 2 years to get approval for the use. I think this whole area is zoned for this type of project, so that wasn't necessarily the hard part, but a lot of planning commission meetings and things like that. And like I mentioned before, it took us a year from our first permit submission to get building permit approved.
And do people at SOM, is that just the way it's always been, or is there a perception among your peers that those timelines have increased and are increasing?
Everyone says that is insane, but they're seeing it on many projects now. So it is new, and it is aggravating for a lot of people.
This is the project you had 4 plan checks on?
What was that?
Is this the project you had 4 plan checks?
Yep. Yeah, and each one new, unique comment. So
I mean, in contrast to what we've been talking about with small firms, do you enjoy working on projects for multiple years at a time? Is that something that, or is there a way you balance it out by working on projects with your dad and creating smaller opportunities to not have to dwell on the same thing for the 3 to 5 years?
yeah, when
Yeah, Daniel
started,
looks so normal.
when I started SO, I was definitely, advocating for, I want to be on a project from concept until ribbon cutting. And then after Moscone, I kind of changed my whole stance. I said, there's no reason to spend 8 years. I could see myself only working on 6 projects for the rest of my career, and that terrified me. So I've made that known, and I'm working on multiple projects right now. It's not just this project, but the idea that I would prefer to work on more, not necessarily smaller, but more projects than one for 8 years. I think that's definitely something I hold. I think there's lots to be learned. I think I learned a ton working on just Moscone for a few years, but yeah, there's a lot more to be learned from working on multiple projects, I would say.
What drew you to go to IIT?
Good question. I think I applied to 12 different architecture schools. IIT was in Chicago. That was a big plus for me, but also gave me a full ride scholarship. So it was hard to say no.
What does your dad think about buildings like this?
I kind of want to bring my dad to this project because he talks about, ordering a truck load of concrete and, for an entire foundation for a house. And then we had the pour for the roof the other day, and it was something like 55 concrete trucks lifts. So it's a whole different scale. I think he appreciates it, but it's a whole different world for him as well.
Yeah, I'm curious with this building here in Brisbane, what measures, if any, were taken anticipating sea level rise or other climate change related issues? It's so close to the water. I mean, can you speak about that in any way?
Sure, yeah. It's close to the water. There is a bay trail that runs around the kind of perimeter, and that bay trail is up and has like a slight retaining wall to break it from the bay, but it's enough for expected sea level rise over the next many years. And then there's kind of a few systems around the perimeter of the site to help mitigate those effects. But, we're up, I forget exactly, but 10, 12 feet from sea level. Just doesn't quite look like it in this photo.
Yeah, no, I mean, it does look like it's 10 or 12 feet, and I think it'll be some number of years before the sea level rises that much. But I look at all the buildings that are sort of along the peninsula, right along the water, and they just look so vulnerable. I don't know. Maybe it's not borne out by the facts, but just intuitively, when I drive over like the San Mateo Bridge and I look down and I see the buildings down there, I'm just like, oh, what's the insurance policy on those buildings like?
Yeah, I think the bigger effects that we'll see are probably site settlement from like raising water tables and things like that, water intrusion under buildings.
Right.
If you look at sea level rise with the NOAA tide information that goes back about 150 years, the sea level has been consistently rising at about the same rate, and it's about 11.5 inches every 100 years. I think it's beautiful to see.
There was just a new report on that Thwaite Glacier in Antarctica that came out yesterday. And it's attached to the land, and so it's melting way faster than it was predicted to melt. And I don't know, it has pretty scary statistics of it. If it goes, the rest of Antarctica will also go faster. So I don't know if those inches a year will apply soon.
Okay, we're at our 1:30 time. I just want to say thank you to all of you. It was a wonderful to spend time with you and to hear all your thoughts. All very interesting. And if we can see you again sometime.
Thanks for organizing, Donald, as always.
You're very welcome.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Take care, everyone.